What do you really know about the Texas Rangers? Some might instantly think of the classic TV Western series, The Lone Ranger, or just imagine a rugged cowboy patrolling the Texas terrain. But throughout the years, the agency has been a vital arm of Texas law enforcement, its members filling where needed, aiding officials and investigating crimes and corruption. Some of the group's most notable accomplishments include leading the effort to capture famed outlaw duo Bonnie and Clyde and protecting President William Howard Taft from an assassination attempt. Whether you're familiar with the law enforcement organization or not, the Texas Rangers are an important part of American history. The group is celebrating its 200-year anniversary in 2023.
I think the Rangers still have the image of swaggering, strong, upright, honest, law-abiding knights in cowboy hats. I mean, this is the image they've had for decades and decades. And to some degree, this image is correct. There are many courageous, and have been many courageous, heroic Rangers.
That's Doug Swanson, a journalist and author of Cult of Glory, the bold and brutal history of the Texas Rangers. Swanson has spent much of his career at the Dallas Morning News as an investigative reporter and editor, but focused the last 5 years researching the long history of the Texas Rangers. So, who exactly made up the early Rangers of the 1800s?
The Texas Rangers initially began as a very disorganized group in 1823 when Texas was still a part of Mexico. The Anglo settlers had come in a few years earlier, mostly under the auspices of Stephen F. Austin, and they were in conflict with the Karankawa Indians, a coastal tribe that had been in Texas for thousands of years. So they put together about 10 men, the initial proto-rangers. These were not big-time gunslingers or anything like that. They were farmers, land surveyors, school teachers, carpenters, that sort of thing. And they were organized to try to hunt down the Karankawas, but what they really ended up doing was trying to build a small fort on the Colorado River. After a few months, they ran out of ammunition and ran out of food, so they never engaged the Karankawa and went back to their regular jobs. So for the Rangers, it was a bit of an inauspicious beginning.
Despite its slow beginnings, the Texas Rangers grew in notoriety throughout the latter half of the 1800s. They were formally recognized by the government in 1835, and shortly after, in 1836, Texas won its independence from Mexico. Under the arch of the government, the Rangers went where they were called. They gained a reputation for their skill and bravery during the Mexican-American War, but while they fought valiantly, many of the darker deeds they committed were not as well publicized.
What I'm trying to do here is examine what's really behind this image and what's been ignored, what's been buried, what's been overlooked. So I try to give the Rangers their due, talk about their heroism, but on the other hand, I want to talk about some of the atrocities, some of the misbehavior, some of the things they did that they should not have done.
Among these acts are horrific crimes, including the execution of many innocent Mexicans, including women and children, and the looting and burning of several peasant villages. Even into the 1900s, the violence persisted.
At the very beginning of the 20th century, around 1911, 1912, 1913, there was a land boom in South Texas, down in the Rio Grande Valley, down near Brownsville, Texas. Land became very valuable then. Lots of people were coming in from the north to establish farms and cities. And many Mexican Americans had lived on this land for centuries. There also was a great deal of upheaval in Mexico at the time, political upheaval. So there was a lot of crime going on, some robbers coming over the border. But again, the white rangers and white settlers wanted this land, so they wanted the Mexican Americans off it. The Rangers helped that. They forced these people off the land. They sometimes did it by execution. And the Rangers became known, in one journalist's phrase, as common man killers on the border in this period. They executed hundreds, maybe thousands of Mexican Americans. Some of these people were bad guys. Some of them were bandits. But a lot of them had committed no crime except to have brown skin. This went on for a number of years down in this part of the state.
In the 1930s, Swanson says the makeup of the Texas Rangers drastically changed as a new office took hold. The state's first female governor, Miriam Ma Ferguson, got rid of all the current Rangers and put in a completely new force. But instead of heading in the right direction, this new bunch had ulterior motives.
They would raid casinos, throw the owner out, and establish their own casino in its place. Or they would stop motorists along the Texas highways and demand bribes. Or they would engage in bootlegging. They were a corrupt force at the time. As a result, once Ferguson was out of office, the new governor and the legislature moved in and attempted to reform the Rangers, put them under the agency, the Department of Public Safety.
While the group was formally under the wing of the Department of Public Safety, the interests of many Texas Rangers purely benefited people similar to themselves.
The Rangers were still the operatives of the power structure in Texas, and by that I mean white men. That's who was in charge in Texas in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So you can see incidents in Ranger history where this was an exercise in power by these people. For example, in 1956, the NAACP tried to integrate some schools in Texas, some all-white schools. The governor at the time was opposed to integration. So he sent the Rangers to these schools, and they stopped integration by threatening to arrest any black children who tried to enroll in these white schools. They sent the Rangers in 1967 to break up a farm workers' strike, for example, by Mexican Americans. So there are lots of incidents where the Rangers, however well trained, however professional, were still acting as the agents of those who were in charge, and those who were in charge were white men interested in helping out other white men.
Today, the organization is different. It's been pared down to 160 people and is working to increase diversity within its ranks.
A lot of people think it's a huge force, but it's not. It's actually very small. Now, you can find a lot of people in Texas and everywhere else, for that matter, who've never met a Texas Ranger, because there's just not that many of them. But of the 160 or so, I mean, it changes from month to month, but of those 160, 4 are women, 8 are black, and 34 are Hispanic. But what the Rangers mainly do is what they've often done. They are called in to assist when rural, small town, sheriff's departments, police departments, other agencies need some help. You know, if there's a murder in a tiny town, the local police department may not have a homicide detective. So they ask the Rangers to come in for assistance. And the Rangers do this all over Texas.
Learning the dark history of the Texas Rangers is important because the racism and bias towards minorities that fueled many of these acts is still very much present today.
This has been going on a long time in a lot of different places, and it's been going on with the Texas Rangers. Now, we talked about the border and the executions down the border. That's an example to me of police brutality, because the Rangers were, when they were killing Mexican Americans, hundreds of them, they were acting as the state police. So this is an old story that is unfortunately with us again. I'm hoping that by understanding this part of the past, we can understand a little more about how we got here and why it is so raw in this country, why people are so angry, why they are so moved. Yes, it's terrible what has happened recently, but it's even worse when we look at how long it's been going on.
In order to better the lives of people today, it's critical to see how deeply rooted these issues are in our country's past. The Texas Rangers have done a lot of good, but the violence and white superiority in its history is also a part of the storyline. To find out more about the organization and our guest, Doug Swanson, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can also check out Swanson's new book, Cult of Glory, The Bold and Brutal History of the Texas Rangers, on Amazon.com or request a copy through your local bookstore. For more behind the scenes, visit Viewpoints Radio on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
As I learned poker, as I became better, as I learned the game on a deeper level, I found myself making better decisions and growing as a person outside of poker.
The parallels of life and poker. Then,
I mean, it really, truly was exactly like what you would expect.
Is lab-grown meat the future? I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows. And find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.